connect your personal history to that of the Jewish story or the Savannah story. And I usually ask people how they found their way to Savannah, and if you're not native to the area, what brought you here. And then tell me a little something about your own background. And in your particular case, you have quite an interesting story of how being Jewish kept you from some of the things in life that you wanted to do. So talk, and when you're ready,
Okay.
I'll ask some questions and we'll chit-chat.
I was born in Tupelo, Mississippi, vibrant Jewish community in northeast Mississippi of 5 families. However, it was the cultural center of northeast Mississippi, and that being the case, there were in the surrounding area about 30 Jewish families, enough to have a little Jewish congregation, and we did have a temple. Of course, you couldn't afford a rabbi, so the men who were heads of the household served as the lay rabbis. And interestingly enough, in a small town like Tupelo, Mississippi, with 5 Jewish families, it became incredibly important to identify who you were. And because of that, I really learned to identify of who I was and from whence I came. Every single Friday night, all 5 of those families were in that little temple for Friday night services. Well, granted, after the services, we went to the local football game, high school football game. There were no services on Saturday because every single one of the parents were merchants, and that was the biggest day for the business. So we did have a very strong Jewish background, and interestingly enough, if those 30 families, every single male in those 30 families was bar mitzvahed. And the way we were bar mitzvahed was about 60 miles away. There's a little town called Columbus, Mississippi. Columbus was large enough to have a rabbi, so the itinerant rabbi came over once a week and gave us Hebrew lessons, and we were all bar mitzvahed. And I lived there till I was 16 years old, and then when I was 16, my parents moved to South Florida, to the Fort Lauderdale area, which interestingly enough, at that particular time, there was a lot of anti-Semitism in Fort Lauderdale. This was in 1949, and you could drive up and down Fort Lauderdale Beach, and the hotels restricted clientele. There were signs everywhere. But nonetheless, we lived there, and I became affiliated with a BBYO chapter in Hollywood, Florida, and that's how I got my continued my Jewish identity, if you will. I went off to college to Emory University and was going to become a dentist. The reason I was going to become a dentist was my father thought it was a good idea, and I was too immature to realize it wasn't a particularly good idea. But nonetheless, at that particular time, the state of Florida did not have a dental school, didn't even have a medical school, and so many pre-med and pre-dental students from Florida went to Emory University because Emory had both a dental and a medical school. I started as a pre-dental student there, not realizing what the culture of the dental school was at that particular time. Nonetheless, after 2 years of pre-dental training, I was accepted to dental school and spent 2 years at the Emory University Dental School. Now, Emory Dental School at that particular time had a dean by the name of John Bueller, who was really clearly anti-Semitic, and he surrounded himself with a faculty of his like. And they made it extremely difficult for the Jewish students there either to graduate on time without having to repeat a year, or not graduating at all, because the Jewish kids, apparently according to Dr. Bueller and the faculty, really didn't have it in their hands. They might have had it between their ears, but they didn't have the dexterity, particularly to become dentists, because it required an awful lot of dexterity to pound a amalgam in a tooth. But that's another story. But at any rate, lo and behold, after my second year at dental school, I received the dreaded letter that stated that they felt that dentistry was not going to be my profession, since I wasn't particularly didn't have a particularly good dexterity, and I should seek other avenues for a life's vocation. Well, at that particular time, the dental school, many of our first 2 years of school were taken in the basic sciences, and they were taken with the medical school, Emory Medical School. And I was making all A's and B's in those courses. I was burning them up. So I came home, and after holding my head in my hands for about a week or so, I recovered, and I said, you know, you really did well in those courses that you're taking in medical school. Perhaps medicine should be a career for you. And beside which, you really liked it. You loved that particular challenge. Now, having had only 2 years of pre-dental, and medical school at that time required 3 years of pre-med, I had to go back to school. And instead of going back to Emory, I went to the University of Florida, since I was a Florida resident. It was a lot cheaper, and completed that 3rd year. About halfway through the 3rd year, I was already accepted to medical school. Having that happen to me perhaps was one of the greatest things that happened in my life, because at the University of Florida, I met this girl with a long pigtail who from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. We fell in love, and the end of the story, or not the end of the story continues after 58 years. We've been married 58 years now. Got married just before I went to medical school. Went to medical school at the University of Miami, and graduated in 4 years, and then went to Cook County Hospital, where I took an internship. I did very well in medical school. I was graduated in the top 10% of the class, and I was in an honor society called AOA, which was kind of like the Phi Beta Kappa medical school. Interestingly enough, while at Cook County was a very surgically oriented hospital, an internship. And I really did very well in the surgical rotation, so much so that the chief surgical resident asked me to apply for a surgical residency. Apparently he thought that I did have it in my hands. But I wasn't interested in surgery. I was more interested in internal medicine. So I returned to Miami, went to Jackson Memorial Hospital, and at Jackson Memorial Hospital completed a residency in internal medicine, and then took some postgraduate training, further training in gastroenterology, and ended up practicing internal medicine, gastroenterology for about 40 years in Miami before coming to Savannah. Now, how did I get to this godforsaken place? Okay, it's very interesting. I was in the service in 1963. And I was stationed at Fort Stewart, Georgia, which is just down at Hinesville, about 30 miles away. Well, if you came into Savannah in 1963, I will tell you forthwith, it was singularly the worst place I had ever seen in my life. The historic district was falling in the ground. If you went down on River Street, there were only 2 establishments down there. There was a restaurant called the Boar's Head, which happens to still be there, and there was a bar, a den of iniquity, I called it, called the Port Royal, where we used to hang out, okay? And other than that, it was boarded up, rat-infested warehouses, and there was clearly no way under the sun that I would ever live in Savannah, Georgia. That just was not going to happen. It really they had just started the restoration movement, but they hadn't gotten very far with it, that's for sure. I did not have the opportunity to come back for 30 years. 30 years went by. In 1993, I went to a little medical meeting actually here in Savannah, and I said, whoa, what happened? I said, this is the prettiest place I ever saw in my life. I brought my wife Joan with me. We took one of these little carriage tours around the historic district. It took my breath away. I fell in love with the city over that weekend. I have a son-in-law and a daughter, and he's a physician, and he was practicing in Miami at that time. He had been in practice maybe 2 years in a group there, and he was very unhappy in Miami, and he was very, very unhappy with the group that he was practicing with. I came home that weekend and I said, you're a young guy. You've only been in practice 2 years. I said, if you're ever going to make a move, now's the time to do it. And if I were you, I'd look in Savannah, Georgia. It's the prettiest place I ever saw in my life. Well, lo and behold, he starts looking through his medical journals and he finds an opportunity here, ends up going into practice with a guy I went to medical school with, of all things. The guy had been about 3 years ahead of me, but I knew him real well. He went into practice with this guy. That was a marriage made in heaven. They got along famously well. This gentleman retired after about 2 or 3 years, and my son-in-law ended up with the practice. Well, he was, and my daughter were in Savannah. My wife and I were in South Florida, and it was the prettiest city, Savannah, that I'd ever seen. My car knew how to get on 95. I didn't even have to drive it. It was a robo-car, whoop, right up 95 to Savannah. After about 10 years or so of that, my wife said, we're kind of tired of South Florida. Maybe we ought to move to Savannah. We go there so much. So lo and behold, we moved to Savannah, and that's when we got here. And I have founded an absolutely fabulous community, wonderful Jewish community, wonderful community outside the Jewish circumference. And I've enjoyed every minute that I've been here, and they will never carry me out of here, I don't think.
I want to go back to, I remember the signs, no Jews, blacks, or dogs, because I grew up in Miami Beach. And I want to go back, though, to the Emory story just once, because I believe you received some type of recognition of your difficulties much later on. Would you tell us what happened?
Interestingly enough, one of the other young men who had the same experience that I had at Emory, a fellow by the name of Perry Brickman, who's from Chattanooga but lives in Atlanta. Perry, after his tenure at Emory, I think it was actually only 1 year he survived, he actually got into the University of Tennessee Dental School. And he went to dental school at the University of Tennessee and became a very successful, recognized, well-honored oral surgeon in Atlanta. And Perry made it a quest to document this story. And he documented the story and brought it some 40 or 50 years later to Emory and showed Emory the documentation that he had. Over 60%, maybe 70% of the Jewish students at Emory, a Jewish dental school, either had to repeat a year or indeed were thrown out of the school. And interestingly enough, and I didn't realize this at the time, every single one of them who either repeated or were thrown out of school did not come from Atlanta. All of the Atlanta Jewish students got through. Well, obviously the reason they got through was the good Dean Bueller was a little nervous about the Jewish dentist in Atlanta. He wasn't worried about Bob Bloom, my father, who was a retired merchant in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, but he was, a little worried about the Jewish dentist. So it seemed like that the Jewish dentist, the Jewish students, from Atlanta, made it through all right. Well, at any rate, Emory came to recognize this, and about 2 or 3 years ago, Emory decided to, if you will, make amends or to apologize. That is the best polite way to state it. And they invited all of us who had this experience back, plus those who had graduated on time. Had a wonderful weekend. A wonderful affair. The president of Emory University apologized for the discrimination that Emory had shown, and we came to realize that the culture at Emory had totally changed. I think about a third of the students at Emory now are Jewish. They have a wonderful program, a Jewish program there, and so the culture of the school has totally changed. And interestingly enough, about 2 weeks ago, two people from Emory came down, and my wife and I took them out to dinner and had a wonderful time enjoying dinner with them. So the culture of the school has changed, and it was through the efforts of Perry Brickman. What Perry did was he went out and he got the names of all of those individuals who had had problems during the Beulah era. And he went out with a camcorder and interviewed a great number of them. And put this into a documentary, which is a wonderful documentary, and presented it to the Emory administration, and that was the impetus for Emory making the amends that they have made.
And throughout your life, you lived in a small town in the South. You moved to a larger city where there was some overt anti-Semitism, and then you had this experience as a professional man when you set up your shingle, your practice. Did you ever experience any problems?
Never. I practiced in Miami, and I practiced in the south end of Miami in the Kendall area. And when I went down there, I went with 2 other individuals who I had trained with. And when I went down to that area, it was still somewhat of a rural area, but we saw no anti-Semitism. In fact, we practiced at Baptist Hospital, and the leadership of the hospital was Jewish. I was the chief of medicine there, and then I became the chief of staff of the hospital between 1980 and 1984. So there were a number of Jewish physicians on the staff of the hospital, and a large Jewish presence. Interestingly enough, though, since it was, quote, Baptist Hospital, there were no individuals on the board of the hospital at that particular time who did not belong to an evangelical church. Now, since that time, the culture and the bylaws of the hospital have changed, and there are Jews on the board of the hospital now.
There's such a strong Jewish population, a large Jewish population in Florida. Did you find culturally it difficult to switch between small town and larger city, and then coming back into Savannah? Are there things that you notice you didn't have growing up, or are there things that you miss from having a larger Jewish community?
Absolutely. A good thick corned beef sandwich, you have no idea how I miss it. Truthfully, it is much easier, at least for me, to be Jewish in a small town than it is to be in Miami. In Miami, you're lost in 150,000, 200,000 other Jews. You can march along never identifying who you are. It becomes extremely important, I feel, to identify who you are in a small community. And the smaller the community, the more important it is to identify who you are. To show those who are non-Jewish that indeed we do have an identity and we do have a culture, and our culture is as rich and as beautiful as any other.
I really like that answer. Thank you. I just want to ask you before, these are meant to be short interviews, and you've given me so much. In terms of what you learned coming from a small Jewish community, and the way you were able to practice your Judaism, what are the things that have taken you through your life that are most important? What is if you distill the essence of Jewish education that you received, what is it that you hope you've imparted to your children and grandchildren?
The extreme, I think Judaism, at least for me, it teaches one the beautiful gift and the golden opportunity to gain knowledge, to study. And that has been so important to me. Not necessarily study just Jewish religion and Jewish history, but to be more of a Renaissance individual, to study many different things. that interest you. And I tried to impart that, or my wife and I have tried to impart that to our children, which I think we have. We're not the most devout Jewish family, but clearly our children knew they were Jewish. So much so that all three of them have married Jewish individuals, okay? And all three of them have remained married to Jewish individuals, their same husbands, for the shortest has been 20 years. So something happened right there. Now, I don't know what it was. I can't exactly put my finger on it, but something happened there. And they have taught their children the same thing, hopefully.
There are lots of things we didn't talk about, but is there something that I didn't ask that you really would like to talk about and leave a record of?
Well, yes, two things. First thing, how much I appreciate the warmth of the Savannah community. In moving here, you were greeted with open arms. And that's part of the culture of being a relatively small Jewish community, because each individual becomes quite important, very, very important. You move to Miami, you're in one of what, 200,000 or however many it is, you know? So you're not, it seems to me, embraced as warmly. You have to go out and seek it in Miami. Here they come and seek you. There's a little difference. There's a big difference, okay, in that attitude. And the second thing, I think in a small community like this, it is so important to identify with as many things as you can. My wife and I belong to two different synagogues here. And the reason I belong to two different synagogues is because God has been fortunate, or I've been fortunate, God has been good to me, and I can afford to be a member of two. And in a small community, it's important for as many people as they can to support the different instruments that community has. And if I can do it, I'm happy to do it.
Thank you very much for a really nice interview. Anyway, tell me about your parents.
Well, my mother and father were from Massachusetts, Western Massachusetts. My father was from Pittsfield, my mother from North Adams. They got married and they lived in North Adams. And he was a merchant there. In 1925, in fact, on March the 27th, 1925, my mother had a child. The child's name was Ruth Barbara Bloom, and I just found this out 3 days ago. At least the middle name, the Barbara part of it, and I'll get to that. But at any rate, unfortunately, on January the 17th, 1926, the child died. And my mother was very depressed, needless to say. And then, but they continued to live in Massachusetts. By 1929, the Depression had started, and my father had a brother who was the only one in the family who had gone to college. He'd gone to Syracuse, and he met a girl from Tuscaloosa, Alabama, a Jewish girl from Tuscaloosa, Alabama, who was at Syracuse. They married, and he moved south to run the juice store in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. By 1929, when things were really bad in Massachusetts, my mother was just, and father were just recovering from the loss of this child. Lo and behold, my uncle writes my father and says, Bob, first thing, it's a lot warmer in Tuscaloosa, Alabama than it is in North Adams, Massachusetts in the winter, number one. And number two, opportunities are really better in the south than they are in the north. So that was the impetus for my parents to move south. And they actually moved to Tuscaloosa and lived there for 6 months while they searched for a place to settle. they found a little, what had been a drugstore in Tupelo, Mississippi, and my father took every penny he had, which in those days was a lot of money, $10,000, and he bought the store and turned it into a ladies' ready-to-wear store. And he became really an integral part of the community. He was a kind of dynamic individual, and he became the commander of the American Legion post. He was president of the Lions Club, one thing or another. He had a lot of non-Jewish friends and was well respected by the non-Jewish community there. He had a very interesting experience while he was there in the store. He had a friend by the name of Finley, Judge Finley, all right? And Judge Finley comes over to the store one day, and he says, Bob, he says, we're having a meeting up in Okolona, this little town about, I don't know, 15, 20 miles from Tupelo. And he says, well, we want you to join us tonight. My dad thought, well, maybe it's the Lions, I don't know. He says, I'll pick you up when the store closes. So sure as the devil, he picks my dad up. They drive up to Okolona. They're out in the country. The trunk of the car opens. The judge has got his cape and his hat and the pointed hat on and the whole thing. What is it? It's the Ku Klux Klan. My father knew that he was going to be tarred and feathered. That was going to be his demise right there, all right? Well, who ends up the great clucky cluck or whatever the devil they call him? It's the judge. And the judge is up there ranting and raving, and then he says, and brothers, I want you to meet my good friend from Tupelo, Mississippi, Bob Bloom. Bob, would you get up and say a few words for the boys? My dad says he got up, he gave the shortest extemporaneous speech he ever gave in his life, sat down, guest of honor at the Ku Klux Klan meeting, and was brought back to Tupelo. And that was his experience. Now, the experience that I had with Ruth Barbara Bloom, I knew I had had a sister, but I didn't know anything at all about her. And somehow or another, here in the fall or the winter of my life, I decided I was going to find out something about her. So what did I do? I wrote to the Bureau of Vital Statistics in the state of Massachusetts looking for Ruth Bloom, who I knew had been born around 1925. I did not know exactly when. And sure as the dickens, I also I asked for birth and for a death certificate. And sure as the dickens, I got both the birth and the death certificate. Now, I had originally asked for the death certificate, and this was several months ago. And on the death certificate, it states that this infant was buried in the Hebrew cemetery in North Adams, Massachusetts. And I said, I'm going to find out something about this. So I tried to call the Hebrew cemetery in North Adams, Massachusetts. There ain't no such thing. So then I called the synagogue in North Adams, and what do? I get a lady on the phone by the name of Miller. And who is she? She's the one that takes care of the cemetery right outside of North Adams. And she said, and I told her my story. And she said, she said, what I'll do is I'm going up there tomorrow. I'm going to see if I can find her stone. Well, to make a long story short, she found the stone and took pictures of it and sent it to me. And I've got pictures of my sister's stone in that cemetery in North Adams. And interestingly enough, the entire stone is written in Hebrew, except for her name. And I took it, I can't read Hebrew, but I took it to Monty Locker, okay? And Monty interpreted it for me, and so I have a picture of that, of stone. Now, I also happen to have a picture in my house, as an old picture was done, obviously in 1925, of my mother holding that child. And I took the picture to Bay Photography, and this afternoon after this interview I'm going to get a copy of that picture to put it with my family pictures in the house.
That's a really nice story. So I'm going to close this by asking you kind of a stream of conscious and see if you can piece this together. You just went on a very interesting trip to places in Europe where many Jews are buried but not remembered. You had a life where you didn't know about a sister and you've now come full circle by finding a way to give her a voice, by adding her to your family, and to recognizing with a visit to the grave that she existed. Why do Jews care so much? We say Kaddish, we light a Yisra candle. Why do we care so much about continuance of a line through those of us who have left? And what, in your most recent experiences, have you learned about tradition, the continuity of the Jewish people, perhaps, that rests in each of us? How do we survive as Jews with so much anti-Semitism, with so many bad historical problems? How is it that we have survived, and what is it about who we are that helps us leave a legacy, if you will? And I'm sorry, it's really an unfair question.
No, it's a great question. There's a wonderful book called Jews, God, and History. A guy by name of Dumont, Max Dumont, I think was the author, who was not Jewish. And he said something at the beginning of that book that is so true. He said, the ancient Greeks, the ancient Romans, the ancient Egyptians went out and they built their empire on monuments. The Jews went out and built their empire on ideas. And that's what made us what we are. We went out in the world and we gave the world ideas. And those ideas are the backbone of Western civilization. And that's why we have survived.
All right, I'll accept that. Thank you. All right, so you're meeting again for the first time, and your family. So what is this about Jewish mishpacha? First of all, explain.
Yeah.
All right, so tell me about it.
We were here for the wedding.
Well, interestingly enough, the particular uncle that I told you about that was influential in my father moving to the South from Tuscaloosa, Alabama, he had two sons who were obviously first cousins of mine. One of those sons, ended up marrying a girl from Houston, whose roots were from Savannah, Georgia.
Her grandfather is the man you asked me to bring the copy of his discharge from the Confederate Army.
Now, is that one for the books?
All right, so people talk about 6 degrees of separation, that somehow we're all related to Adam in the garden, or
We are family, and everybody was here for the wedding. All the family, the Silversteins and the Blums.
This particular cousin, their granddaughter got married here in Mikveh, Israel. She wanted a destination wedding, and all the family came and got together.
Including me.
But this was relatively recently. Had the two of you met before? Did you realize?
About 2 years.
Did you realize he's been here since for a couple of years?
I know.
So had you realized you were related?
Yeah.
Yeah, we kind of knew.
We knew.
right.
He lives at the landings and I live at the beach. It's kind of too far apart to visit it.
So tell me, for the uninitiated, what does it mean when someone says to you that they love playing Jewish geography?
What we just did.
Yeah.
And why is making the connection so important?
Oh.
Why does it matter?
Because it's nice to know you have family all over the world. It really is.
That's it. There's nothing quite as warm and fuzzy as family.
When you can't prove blood relation and you're looking for connections, how does that Jewish connection help?
Can't answer that one. I don't know. But I know the blood relations.
Well, we're such a, to begin with, we're a pinhead in the scheme of the civilization of the world.
Yeah, huge thing.
Okay? And so first thing, we cling to each other because our strength is in us clinging to each other, you know? And that's probably it as much as anything.
I love to watch all these programs about roots, and I realize how very important it is and how thrilled you are when you find a root even 4 or 5 generations back. I didn't bring it to you, but I do have the family tree.
That's incredible.
Big thing.
That's incredible.
It's huge.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
Oh, it's good to see you.
That's
Nice
really
to see
cool.
you.